If you have some scrapwood pieces just lying around, don't throw them away. I'm going to show you 10 projects that you can make that are perfect for Christmas decorations. I hope you enjoy. Project, I'm using my table saw and I am cutting the edges off of a decking board. So I'm just taking a blade's length off of each side just to take the rounded edge off. Then I'll set my guard to 2 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to trim that decking board down, and then I'll be able to get another 2 1/8 of an inch in width on the other piece. Then using my miter saw, I'm going to measure 3 inches and I'm going to cut 3 pieces at 3 inches in length. So all of these will be 2 1/8 of an inch in width. We're going to cut 3 at 3 inches, 2 at 4 inches, and 3 at 5 inches. So it will be a total of 8 pieces. I also have another scrap piece of wood. I'm not sure what it came from. I think maybe this is a furring strip from Lowe's, but this, I may have cut some off the side. It measures about 1 1/2 inches by 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to cut that down to 10 inches, and then I'm going to cut 2 pieces to 2 1/8 of an inch. This is going to fit perfectly on top of those blocks that we just cut, so you will need 2 of those. I have another scrap piece of wood. This measures about 2 1/2 inches wide. It's about an inch thick, so it was probably a decking board that we had to trim some off of the side. And I'm going to cut this one down to 20 1/4 of an inch. Now that I've made all of my cuts, I'm going to go through, sand each of the pieces to make sure they're nice and smooth, remove any of the debris so we can prepare these for stain and paint. So I'm going to take that largest piece there that's 20 1/4 inches long, and I'm going to use that same mission oak stain that we used in an earlier project, and I'm just applying that with a foam brush and then wiping the excess off with a lint-free cloth. I'm also going to stain the piece that we cut at 10 inches and then the 2 smaller pieces that we cut at 2 1/8 of an inch. And I am staining all sides of each of these pieces. Now while those are drying, we're going to take a square and the blocks that we cut that are 2 1/8 of an inch wide, we're going to line these up at the bottom. So we're going to put a 5-inch, a 4-inch, and then a 3-inch. We're going to attach them together using some wood glue and just put a nice generous amount. Then we're going to glue them side by side, making sure that we keep it flush at the bottom. That's very important. Then I'm going to take a clamp to put these pieces together, to squeeze it and let it get some good adhesion on that glue. We'll set that aside for a couple of hours and let that glue dry. Then we're going to take that same square, we're going to take a 3-inch, then a 5-inch, then a 3-inch, then a 4-inch, then a 5-inch piece. We're going to do the exact same thing by gluing them together and then clamping them to let that glue set up. If you have any excess glue, make sure to wipe that off, otherwise you'll have to sand it off later once it dries. Once the glue has set, now it's time to paint. I'm going to paint these with 2 coats of white paint, and I will paint all of the sides except for the bottom. Once the paint has dried, now I can add my decals that I created on my Cricut. Now if you don't have a Cricut, you could certainly use stencils, or you can draw this with a magic marker, or even hand paint them with some acrylic paint. Each one of the decals are 1 1/4 inch wide, and I used the font BFC Magic Marker. For each of the 3-inch blocks, I cut the decal to be 2 1/2 inches. For the 4-inch blocks, I cut the decal to be 3 inches high. And for the 5-inch blocks, I cut those down to be 3.5 inches. When adding the lettering to the second block of 3, I made sure to take that first set so that I could line those up at the very bottom. You'll continue to add your lettering to those last 3 blocks, and then we're going to get our wood pieces that we stained. We're going to be attaching that 10-inch piece right between the S and the M, and because this piece is slightly thinner than the width of the white piece, you'll want to make sure that you keep it flush to the front. And since we've already painted this, we can't use the wood glue, so I'm going to use some E6000 for that long permanent hold, and then just a little bit of hot glue to hold it in place until the E6000 sets up. You also want to make sure that you keep it flush at the bottom of the white blocks so that when we set this up on the base, everything will sit level and flat. Now we'll add that E6000 hot glue to the other block of 3 so we can attach that on the right-hand side of our wood piece. It should be looking something like this. Now we'll take our smaller pieces, and since they're just going to rest on top of the white blocks, I'm only going to use some hot glue on this by adding that to the bottom of the piece and a little bit on the side of that 10-inch piece. We'll do that on both sides. And then once your glue has set, we can now add this to that base, which is that piece that we cut to 20 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to add some E6000 to the bottom and a little bit of hot glue on each end just to hold it in place. But you could also add some brad nails through the bottom if you want to have more of a secure hold. Now you could leave it just like that, or you could add some greenery around the bottom, or you could take some of Dollar Tree's LED lights and wrap that around the base, and then I just twisted the end together and the battery pack fits perfectly right behind the cross. I'm using this scrap piece of 1/2-inch plywood. It measures about 24 inches by 8 3/4 of an inch. Using my electric sander and 220 grit sandpaper, I'm going to go over the entire piece, including the outside edging, to make sure that it doesn't have any splinters or rough edges. Once I wipe the debris from that, I will be using a stain, and this is by Minwax Premium Oil in the stain color Mission Oak, and it has a gloss finish. Now I'm using some of these little triangle pieces. These work wonders when you're using a larger piece of wood to hold it up to stain or paint. And I do have that listed in my Amazon store. The link to my Amazon store is in my description box below if you guys are interested in that. I'm going to apply the stain using a foam brush and then using a lint-free cloth to remove the excess and blend it in. Now, I originally did stain the sides, but that's not necessary for this project, so you don't need to do that. I let mine dry overnight, and then I'm going to take 1-inch painter's tape and place that on the end to use as a straight edge guide to add my second piece of painter's tape. Then I'll pull that piece up and add it to the other side to do the same thing by using it as a straight edge. Then add your second piece. Then pull your first piece up. Now make sure you push all your edging down to make sure that your paint does not seep underneath your painter's tape. And then I'm going to paint this with 2 coats of white paint. Then I'm also going to make sure that I get the outside edging. So that's why it's not necessary to stain the outside edging if you're going to be painting it. But if you're going to do the reversed effect and have the outside stained and the inside painted, you would want to stain the outside edges. So once that dries, I'm going to remove that painter's tape, do the exact same thing for the bottom and the top by adding that first piece to use as a straight edge guide to add the second piece, and then making sure that I push those second pieces down so that the paint will not bleed through. Again, I'm going to do 2 coats of the same white paint on the top and the bottom, as well as the outside edges. Once you remove that painter's tape, this is going to give you the perfect faux frame for your piece. So again, you could stain the outside and paint the inside. I did want my frame to have the white color and the stain in the middle. Because I created a decal on my Cricut, I just typed in nativity under Cricut's design space, chose the nativity image that I liked, and then I added the wording. The font that I used was BFC Fashion Statement. And then once I grouped those together, I sized it to be about 19 inches long and 6 inches high. If you want to hang this on the wall, you could add a sawtooth hanger to the back. I'm actually going to set mine on a shelf. I think this piece turned out absolutely gorgeous, and I love the fact that you can create a framed look without physically having to add the wood framing to the outside. For this project, I am using some scrap decking boards. They measure about 1 inch thick. They're about 5 3/8 of an inch wide. I'm going to cut 3 of these down to 8 inches in length. Then I'm going to use my electric sander with a 220 grit fine sandpaper to go over each one of these to smooth all of the edges and to make sure those ends are not rough. Then I'm going to take a cloth and wipe each of those off to make sure I remove all of the sawdust and debris. Now I'm going to be gluing these 3 pieces together using some Gorilla Wood glue. So I'm just going to apply this to 2 of the boards, and I was having a really hard time trying to get my glue to come out. I think it was like a little bit dried up on the inside. So I just took the lid off, put a nice good amount on there, and then I'm going to use an old paintbrush to spread that out to make sure I have a nice even coat on 2 of those to make sure I have some good adhesion. Then I'm going to stack the 2 of these on top of each other and then stack that third one on top. So what we're making are book stacks. Now I know you've probably seen some people make book stacks 1,000,000 times, but I love using these decking boards because the edges are rounded and it gives it a really nice realistic look of a real book. So I'm going to take some clamps once I straighten those up and put one on each end to make sure my glue adheres well, and I let mine dry for several hours. Now you can stain it, you could paint it in the traditional red, green, and white or silver and gold Christmas colors, but for my decor, I'm going to give mine 2 coats of white paint. You do want to paint the entire piece. Now, once it dries, look how realistic this book stack looks with those rounded edges. So now we're going to add some wording to the side. I'm going to use some stickers from Dollar Tree, but you could use your Cricut, you could handwrite this, whatever you want, and put whatever wording you want on the side. I'm starting at the bottom from the right, working my way to the left, trying to keep everything centered up. So once I get the word at the bottom, I'll start at the top so I can make sure I center that one, and then I'll work my way to the middle. Also a lot easier if you use a pair of tweezers because these are pretty delicate. Then I'm going to go over that with my hairdryer on the high setting to make sure that that glue activates and that these stickers do not come off. I'll make sure each one of those is pressed down. And now to embellish it, I'm going to be using some ribbon. This came from Walmart. It has a burlap center with the buffalo check on each side, and it's about 2.5 inches wide. On the opposite side of where I placed the wording, I'm going to hot glue the end piece on the bottom of the book stack. Let that hot glue cool so that I'll be able to pull this tightly as I wrap it around. Then I can hot glue it at the very bottom where I started. I didn't add any hot glue to the top of the book stack because I want to add some more embellishments to that. So it should be looking something like this. Now I'm going to use some greenery from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just going to pull a couple of these pieces off and tuck those underneath the ribbon. I'm not going to hot glue them just yet because I want to add a few more things, like some of these pine cone ornaments. So these came from Family Dollar a couple of years ago. They were $1 for a pack of 6. I'm going to pull the twine hangers off of it and then hot glue 2 on top of the greenery, and then I'll add a third one right where the stems go underneath that ribbon. And this piece turned out absolutely gorgeous, and I would love to know what you guys think. A piece of 4x4 post. This measures 4.5 inches tall and it is 3 3/8 of an inch wide. Just like we did in our previous project, I'm going to apply some antique wax and then blend that in with a paper towel. Allow it to thoroughly dry, and I did make sure to get all of the sides, including the top and the bottom. I'm going to pre-drill a hole in the bottom so that I can use this hook that I already had on hand, and I've already painted it so that it will match the wood. We are creating a stocking hanger, so you guys know how expensive these can be. There are so many different ways you can customize this depending on each person and what they like. You can use some of Dollar Tree's ornaments to decorate these. I'm going to be using Dollar Tree's deer ornament, and I'm going to hot glue this directly above the hook where the stocking will hang. Then to decorate the top portion of this, I'm using some of Dollar Tree's frosted greenery. I thought this would blend in really well with the same color as the deer. I'm going to hot glue some of those greenery pieces all around the top, and then just some of the greenery without the white balls on it on the opposite sides. Then I'm going to create a bow with some gingham ribbon, just like we did in our previous project, by folding that over and then tying it with a piece of twine. Now I did leave some length on the tails because I want that to flow down the sides of the stocking hanger, and I will make sure to dovetail both sides of those bows. Then I'm going to add in one more of those glittery white balls in the center, and you have a customizable stocking hanger. For this project, we are using a decking board. I have cut it into a triangle. It is 4 3/4 of an inch across the bottom and 6 1/4 inches on each side. Now you can cut all 3 pieces of your wood into triangles if you want them to have a little bit more spacing. I originally cut mine into triangles and then cut a piece off of the edge. So the second piece is going to have about an inch cut off of the side, but it is 8 inches tall. And the third piece is about 7 1/4 inches tall. And again, I cut a little more than an inch off of the opposite side. Now that left about 3.5 inches at the bottom. For the full triangle, I am using some antique green chalk paint. I'm going to paint this entire piece on all the sides with 2 coats, and then one of the triangles I am painting with a white chalk paint. Now that my green paint has dried, I'm going to take that white chalk paint and go around all of the edges of the triangle on both sides, including all of those corners. So we're making a trio of trees, And if it went a little too fast for the measurements, you can always just pause it. That's why I thought that it would be easier if I just drew it out for you guys to show you the exact measurements. For the third one, I painted that with some antique wax, and then I went over the white paint after it had dried with the antique wax to distress all of those edges. Now I'm going to glue these two that I cut the pieces off together, and I'm using a straight edge at the bottom to make sure I can keep them straight across the bottom so that they'll sit flat when I set them up. Then I'm going to attach the full triangle right in the middle. So this is why I cut some of that edging off. That way the peaks at the top of the tree would be closer together rather than spaced wider apart. Then I'm using an ornament from Walmart. Now this originally came with this really cute gingham bow, and it got lost in transition, and so I had to make one to put right at the top that's going to cover that little hole, and then I can hot glue this right to the center. And I think this turned out beautiful, but I would love to know what you guys think. This project, I am using a 4x4 post. Now, they are not truly 4 inches square. They are actually 3 3/8 of an inch square. I'm using 3 of these. One measures 10 inches, one 8 inches, and one 6 inches. I'm going to give each one of these one coat of white chalk paint. I wanted mine to look a little distressed, so I'm allowing some of that wood to show through. But I am painting all sides, including the top and the bottom. Now, once the paint dries, I'm going to take some ribbon. I found this at Walmart. It is 2 1/4 inch wired ribbon, and I'm going to hot glue that at the bottom edge on one side, and then just pull it tightly and wrap it around to the other side. Then I can cut that off and then glue it there. So it should be looking something like this. So it's just going to be wrapped all the way around, and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the opposite side. So it's going to look like a really beautiful Christmas present. Now I am not putting any ribbon at the bottom because I want it to sit flat when I set these up. So I'm going to do that for all 3 pieces of the wood. Now of course you can use whatever color ribbon you like. Once I have all of these done, I'm going to take some gingham ribbon. This is 1 inch ribbon, and I'm cutting down 3 strips at 11 inches and 1 at 5 inches. I'm going to hot glue the 11-inch strip into a loop. Once the glue sets, I'm going to add a dot of glue where I just glued those 2 pieces together on the inside, and then I can pinch it from the top down to the bottom, and this is going to create 2 loops. Now it might look a little weird, but don't worry, you can kind of straighten it out a little later on. You just want 1 loop on each side. I'm going to do that for the other 2 11-inch ribbons, and for the 5-inch, I am just going to glue that into 1 single loop and leave it just as that 1 loop. Now once all your glue sets up, we're going to take the top of the present. Now if it does not look even, that's okay because we didn't glue the sides down. You can straighten those up if you need to. We're going to glue the double loop right in the center. Then we're going to take our second double loop. We're going to glue it diagonally on top of that one. Then we'll take our third one. We're going to glue it in the opposite direction on top of that one. And then we'll take our 5-inch, just the 1 loop, and we're going to glue it right in the center after we fluff all of our loops out, and it's going to make a beautiful bow for the top of your present. I created the exact same bow for the other 2 pieces of wood, so now I have a trio of gorgeous high-end Christmas presents. You can customize these in so many different ways by painting the wood a different color or using different ribbon, but I think these are absolutely gorgeous and I hope you like them too. For this project, we're using another decking board. I'm going to cut 1 piece down to 6 inches and 1 to 5 inches. Then we're going to find the center of each of the boards, make a mark, and then use a speed square to line that mark at the center to the bottom corner on each side and draw a line. So you're going to have a triangle on the front, and you'll do that for both boards. Then you can use that line to determine what degree angle you need to cut on your miter saw. Mine ended up being 22.5 degrees. Cut that down, then you can flip it over, line it up with the center at the top, and cut the same degree angle on the other side. You'll do that for both boards, and you just want to be really, really careful since these are smaller pieces and your hand's pretty close to that blade on that saw, so just use extra caution and just take all the safety measures that you can possibly take to make sure that you do not cut yourself. Then we're going to sand all of this down nice and smooth and remove any of the debris and sawdust from it. Now you can stain these, paint these, whatever color you like. I'm going to paint mine with 2 coats of white paint, including all sides, and allow that to dry. Once my paint dries, I'm going to apply a layer of Mod Podge just to the top of each of these, which are now going to be Christmas trees. And I'm going to allow that Mod Podge to dry. Just make sure you get a nice even layer on top of each one. Now you can use some beautiful fabric or napkins. I'm going to use this scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby. It just fits the theme of my decor. It has that gorgeous buffalo check and then these gold and silver snowflakes. It is a pretty thick paper, but you can definitely use this method with fabric or a napkin. I laid down my heat press mat to protect my table, then I laid the wood piece. Now I'm lining up the design for the scrapbook paper. Then I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper and lay that over the scrapbook paper, and then using my mini heat press, or you can use a household iron, I have it set on between 360 and 375 degrees Fahrenheit, go over the parchment paper to make sure that the Mod Podge heats up and it's going to attach your scrapbook paper to your wood piece. Then I kind of test it to make sure that everything has adhered. Once it cools down, you can trim it up closer to the edge with a pair of scissors or an X-Acto knife. Because this paper was pretty thick, I found that using a utility knife got a much closer cut. We'll do the exact same thing for the other one. You could definitely use a different scrapbook paper and make several different colors or different kinds. And then to get an even closer edge, I'm going to use my finger sander, which I do have this listed in my Amazon store. If you're interested, this is going to give us a nice clean edge all the way around. And there are so many different ways that you can make these gorgeous Christmas trees. I have a few pieces of scrap decking boards that already have angles cut on them from when we added onto our deck last year. If I had to guess, there are like 50-degree angles on each top end there, and I'm going to measure from the point down, and I'm going to cut those to 11.5 inches tall, and I'll do that for both of them. So they're going to look like this. Then I'm going to take another decking board. I'm going to measure the center of that at the top, and then I'll measure 2 inches down on each side. Then I'm going to use that speed square to draw a line from the center mark to my 2-inch mark so that I will know what degree I need to set my miter saw to cut these angles. This board is 14 inches long. So it ended up being about 35 degrees, and I cut those 2 angles. You can just flip that over, cut the same angle on the other side. So what you'll have is the 11.5 inch board measured from the tip to the bottom. It has like a 50-degree angle on it. You'll need 2 of those. The piece that we just cut from the center down to the bottom will be 14 inches, and you'll need another decking board that's 14 inches long with no cuts. Make sure to go over, sand everything really well so you can make sure everything's nice and smooth. Now to assemble our pieces, we're going to place these two with the long ends butting together. I'm going to attach them using some Gorilla wood glue. And you want to add a nice generous amount. I like to take an old paintbrush, kind of spread it around to make sure everything's going to adhere well. We'll push those two together. We're going to take our longer piece with the point at the top. Now I'm not going to stain mine, so I'm trying to determine which side I think looks best. Then I'll add the glue to the back side. Spread that out, and then I'll add the glue at the top so that I can make sure that the glue's not seeping on the back side of this. So that way I can kind of control where the glue is at the top of the wood. Then we're going to flip it over, make sure everything stays flush at the bottom and that you're placing that board in the center. Then I'm going to clamp everything together until that wood glue dries, and that's going to take several hours. Now that the glue has set up, you could stain this or paint it whatever color you would like. I want to keep mine in the bare wood color, so I'm just going to be dry brushing some white chalk paint all around it. Now, if you'll notice at the bottom in the center, I did have to add a craft stick right there at the bottom because I did not have that front piece completely flush with the back pieces and it didn't want to sit up straight. So that is an option for you to kind of fix that, as you can wood glue a craft stick to the bottom. Now I'm going to paint a door. I added 2 coats of the white paint. Once that white paint dried, I'm going to take some brown acrylic paint and kind of shade in around one side and the top part of the door. Once that dries, I'm going to take my finger sander with a 220 grit sandpaper on it and gently go over that to kind of blend it in. Now it's time to add our piece to our base. So to do that, I'm going to use that wood glue all along the bottom. I'm only adding this hot glue just to hold it there temporarily so that I will be able to add screws to the bottom. So once that hot glue kind of cools and it sets in place, I just grabbed whatever was on my crafting table, which was this box of pine cones, to be able to lean this over so the church wouldn't topple over. That way I could pre-drill some holes in the bottom of each of the boards and add some wood screws. This is going to make it extra sturdy, and I made sure to countersink those screws. If you're not familiar with what that is, you're pushing it down further than the wood so it doesn't scratch the surface that it's sitting on. This piece turned out absolutely gorgeous. I love it, and I would love to know what you guys think. For this project, we're using a decking board that is 12 inches by 5 3/8 of an inch. And I'm using a wet paintbrush to apply Waverly's Antique Wax, and then I'll use a dry paper towel to blend it in and remove any excess. I allowed that to thoroughly dry, and I also made sure to get all of the sides of this piece. Then I'm going to use some painter's tape to tape off each of the sides right at the edge, and make sure that you seal it really well right in the center. Once I have all of those in place, I'm going to use Waverly's white chalk paint, and I'm going to give this 2 coats, allowing it to dry in between coats. Now, I did wait for my paint to dry before I removed the painter's tape, and this is going to create a gorgeous border that now looks like it is framed. We're going to use one of Dollar Tree's metal Christmas words, and I'm giving this 2 coats of black chalk paint, and I'm doing this on wax paper so that it doesn't stick to the surface that I'm painting on. Then we can apply this right to the center using some hot glue, and just be super careful because it does make that metal lettering very hot. Then I'm going to attach 2 pieces of greenery. This came off of a bundle from Hobby Lobby. While that's cooling, I'm going to take some ribbon and just create a very simple bow by folding that over and using a piece of twine to tie it right in the middle right after I pinch it. I'm going to double knot that in the back and then cut that excess twine off. Then I like to dovetail the ends, so you just fold the end pieces over and cut them at an angle. And then I'm going to attach this right in the center where the 2 greenery pieces meet. And then I added in a few tiny pine cones and this project is complete, and I think it is gorgeous. You guys let me know what you think. For this project, we are using some 2x4s, one at 10 inches, one at 13 inches, and one at 16 inches. I am painting each one of these with one coat of white paint. I'm actually using some house paint that I had left over, so you can paint it with whatever, acrylic, chalk, whatever you like. I'm painting all of the sides and the one end. The other end I left because we're going to be taping this off and painting it a different color. So I measured up about 2 3/4 of an inch on all three pieces, and then I'm going to use a piece of painter's tape to go right above that 2 3/4 inch line and wrap it all the way around the 2x4. We're going to do that for all three pieces, and then we're going to paint it black on that end. So I'm using some black chalk paint. Make sure you get all of the sides, including the very bottom portion of the 2x4. Let it dry, and then you can remove your tape, and it leaves some really beautiful crisp lines. Now I'm using some 1-gallon paint stir sticks. You can get these in a pack of 10 at Lowe's. I'm going to cut 3 of these down to 4.5 inches. And then I'm going to paint each one of these with black chalk paint on all sides, including the ends. We're going to be using another 2x4, and this one is 10 inches long. I'm going to give this one coat of black chalk paint on all sides, again including those ends. Now we're going to go back to the pieces that we painted white and black, and yes, we are making snowmen. We're going to attach those paint sticks using some hot glue. So on the smallest one, I'm going to attach that at a slant, and then the medium-sized one, I'm going to attach that in a slant as well, or an angle, and I'm doing it in the opposite direction as the small one, and then the largest one I'm just going to glue straight across. Then I'm going to use a pencil and draw out the faces for each of the snowmen, and this is where you can get really creative. I created several different faces for mine, and I'm using an oil-based Sharpie to go over the outline of each one, and then I painted the nose with a pumpkin spice acrylic paint, and then the color of the eyes, I just used a colored Sharpie. So I gave the smallest and medium-sized one blue eyes, and the larger one has brown eyes. And I used white chalk paint for the white parts of the eyes. Now we're going to create some scarves, so pick out whatever color ribbon you want. And for the medium-sized one, I'm going to tie that around right below the face and use a little bit of hot glue to attach it to one side. And then I can add a little bit more hot glue under the top piece of the ribbon to make sure both pieces of the scarf will stay on one side. Then after trimming that down, I'm going to cut small slits to make it look more realistic. And then I'll add a dot of hot glue on the back side to make sure the back part doesn't move around. For the smallest snowman, I'm going to do the exact same thing, except I'm going to attach it on the opposite side and make sure that those two pieces of the scarf flow on that side. For the largest one, I'm going to take that same colored ribbon and create a bow tie and just pinch that in the middle and tie it with a piece of twine, and then I'll wrap that twine with the same colored ribbon all the way around so you won't be able to see that. Then we can glue that one down, and he has a cute bow tie. To create the buttons, I'm going to use some black chalk paint and a Dollar Tree round sponge dauber. You could certainly glue real buttons on here, but I did not have enough of the same color and size for this project. Using some snowflake stickers from Hobby Lobby, I'm going to add these to the top of the hat, and you can add as many or as little as you like. And then remember that 2x4 that we painted black? I've created a decal on my Cricut to add to the front of this. I have this as a free printable on my website, and the link to my website is in the description box below. You can print this out and trace it onto your project using a white paint pen or white chalk. We're going to be now adding each of the 2x4s on top of the 10-inch black 2x4. So I am using some hot glue to temporarily hold those in place and added the tallest one flush to the back and in the center, the smallest one flush to the side and the front, and the medium size flush to the other side and the front. Now I can pre-drill holes in each one of the 2x4s so that I can add screws to make sure everything is reinforced and will stay in place. Now I'm making sure to countersink each one of my screws so that it doesn't scratch any surface that it's sitting on. Then I'll flip that over and get that back 2x4 doing the same thing. Now this project turned out so cute, and there's so many different ways that you can create these cute little snowmen by changing up those scarves, the facial expressions. You guys let me know what you think, and if you have a favorite out of today's video, please let me know in the comments down below. I always love to know which one is your favorite. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Please take care, and I will see you guys next time.